if you do not know, if you cannot forecast in a good way, if you cannot then also manage the processes, then you might get stuck.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to another episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers. And in each of these episodes, I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with different people from all across the world in different, spheres or different areas of the topic in the topic of BPM or business process management. So I'm talking to people that are consultants. I'm talking to internal employees that are trying to drive BPM in their organization. I'm talking to academics as well. So I'm getting quite a diverse spread of experiences and stories from these people or from my guests. And I certainly learn a lot. I glean a lot from the people I get to sit down and have this conversation with. And I hope you do as well. I'd encourage you to bring out your notepads and pens. We're going to learn a lot in this episode, I am sure of that. But today I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with Tobias Unger, and Tobias is the head of Center for Process Bionics at Deloitte. Now, Tobias has a very, broad experience or diverse experience under the topic of BPM, but we're going to find out, the particular topics that really fascinate and interest him at the moment. Tobias, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and looking forward to the conversation.
Now, that was obviously a very brief introduction. I think what our audience would love to hear from you is when were you first introduced to the topic of BPM? What is BPM to you? And then take us on a journey leading up to what you're doing today.
All right, that will be a lengthy answer. So I started actually looking at BPM when I started my career a couple of years ago. And I was a system auditor. So I audited ERP systems. Yeah, and now back then that was all about checking tables and checking system configurations. But at the end of the day, it was basically the compliance perspective on how the processes were coded in the systems. Yeah. Right. So that's where I started the journey afterwards. And I was in consulting. So I did a lot of shared services implementation, for example, where you transfer processes and consolidate processes. So that's, again, a different way of optimizing processes. Yeah. Then I went into Siemens shared services. I was there for 6 years, and I started also implementing a lot of technology into processes. So again, basically then touching another level. Besides the organizational transformation. So we really try to standardize, harmonize before we implement the technology. Then I went on the intelligent automation journey. So I was heading the Center of Expertise for Robotics Process Automation and Innovation already a couple of years back when the entire topic started. So we automated over 250,000 hours in the second year. That was, again, basically working on processes and transforming the way processes are executed. I was then heading the first S/4HANA finance template also. As a chief product owner at Siemens. So again, a lot about processes, because before you implement a template, you have to define what the standard basic process is that you hard code again into a system. Right. And then I went on into the journey. So I did a lot of consulting afterwards. Now I'm heading the Center of Process Bionics at Deloitte. And again, it's all about transforming processes in the digital era. And if you ask me, what's now bottom line, what's business process management to me? It's basically the way businesses manage their operational and support processes across the company. The manage here basically is a combination of discovery, of modeling, of analyzing, and of measuring, and which today is very data-driven, which then leads basically to the improvement piece. So the optimization, the transformation, and the automation of the process.
Yeah, that's great. That's amazing. That's quite a lot of experience there. You mentioned RPA. I know we're going to talk about process mining. So you've definitely seen a lot when it comes to the world of BPM. What's one of the biggest challenges you see organizations face when adopting BPM? And obviously that's a very broad question because every organization is at a different maturity level when it comes to process management. But what would you say to that?
I think the biggest challenge is getting the full picture right. So because we talked several perspectives, we talked compliance, which is one very important perspective, and with compliance comes basically conformance checking. Yeah, so you have to see how your processes perform in real life versus a set of legal or procedure requirements you might have. Right. Then you have the optimization perspective, which involves transformation, simplification, lean, making the process efficient and effective for the company. And today also a lot of technology implementation. This requires ongoing measurement, and also governance. Governance is an important piece. And I think I see a lot of organizations that are kind of lacking the right approach to governance, because in the past this has been very much compliance driven again, or standard driven. So the global process owners trying to map out their to-be process and then trying to basically bring all the countries and all the systems and all the areas basically to one single process, which never really worked because there is some business logic behind process variants, etc. Right. And bringing all these perspectives together and forming basically one common picture out of it, which at the end of the day enables organizations and not basically is somehow only there for basically the governance, and the standardization, but it's also there for really the optimization from a business perspective. I think bringing this picture together and then bringing also the parts together, the people that automate processes, the people at the business that has to basically execute or wants to execute these processes, and the people with, the other stakeholders in this game, bringing them all together in one picture and making it efficient for an organization. To have BPM, because I think it can be a great competitive advantage. I think that's really the challenge, because it's a lot of perspectives involved. And you see that some are, for example, performing very well on implementing technology, but they're not so strong in the governance piece. Others are strong in the governance, so they are have a very high basically compliance to standards. But then they are not very efficient because they lack technology implementation, for instance. And you have different shades of gray, I think, in the companies. And for me, it's always important to, no matter which angle we are talking about, a little bit bringing this into the broader picture. And at the end of the day, making it work for the business units, because you could never change a process against the business requirements at the end of the day.
Right. And would you say that there is, I guess, more frequently a stakeholder which is harder to get on board to what you're doing when it comes to process management?
I think the hardest stakeholder to get on board is always the most important one, which is the business or the user at the end of the day. Right. And I think that's one of the key success factors of BPM. If you don't make it work for the business or for the users at the end of the day who have to execute the process, and if you do not involve them, I think then the result can't be good. Yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge, because yes, they're critical, but at the end of the day, they have the requirements, and they have the need. Towards the processes that you want to manage. So, and you have to accommodate that. And this basically is a little bit a different perspective than just looking at the efficiency angle or the governance angle. So trying to get everything conforming to one standard model, which again will never happen. Also a bottom-up approach. And I think this is very, very important, because today we have the tools and the means to do that. If you consider like process mapping 15 years back, you were drawing nice charts, either on PowerPoint or in other tools. And then you were basically, via experts, engagements, and via global process communities, you were trying to socialize that in your company. And you always had then basically these frustration first approaches, where the first problems that came onto your table were the most important problems, but you had no chance to map that versus reality. And that was very top-down driven, of course, because you had no other way of organizing it. I mean, today there's data. Today there's tools like process mining, task mining, and you have the possibility to really build the digital twins of how processes really work in reality, and then have a very data driven approach towards optimization. So considering what are the most frequent variants, considering what are the outliers, and in a very a number-driven approach, drive then the optimization in your organization, and also in a very bottom-up approach, involve all the required stakeholders, which is at the end of the day, again, the business users, because you can give them the transparency now, what's happening to the left, what's happening to the right, and you can actively involve them into the entire optimization cycle of BPM. I always call this digital lean versus the classical lean that you did in the past, because again, it's very much insights driven, and you can give the transparency once it's there to anybody in your company. And I think that completely changes the way BPM can work basically in the digital era.
Yes, yeah, it's certainly changed, or the BPM landscape has certainly changed quite a lot over the last 10, 15 years with technology. And I think that I certainly come across organizations that their experience of BPM is 5, 10, 15 years old, where, they didn't have the best experience because their team went on a 18-month, 2-year journey to document processes because, they were told to do so, or they'd heard that one of their competitors was doing that. But without, I guess, a purpose or a why or a driver behind it, without, I guess, an end goal. What are we doing with these processes once we've documented them? Then they kind of ended up just sitting there collecting dust. I guess on that, what do you feel like are the biggest drivers of BPM? And do you think it's too, I guess, swung in one direction? Obviously, you mentioned compliance already, and I know from other conversations I've had, innovation is a topic that maybe isn't looked at as much. But what would you say when it comes to the drivers of BPM?
Well, today I think it's really connecting BPM with execution, because today you have the means to do that. So, and the reason for that is very simple. If you do BPM based on the data, and if you have this transparency, you can not only look back, but you also can try to a little bit look forward to simulations, to projections, etc. And this basically gives you actionable insights. And what you can really do is you can bring this recommender engines, or execution systems, and you can connect them with how you do BPM today. And this is highly relevant because it's not basically because it's a completely integrated approach to the reality you have and the reality that is basically written in your data versus the traditional approaches where you basically always automated and you always optimized, but somehow you were taking pieces and parts out of certain platforms, putting them on different platforms, and you were putting all these lines of codes across the processes, and the process still didn't care. It was optimized across several technology layers, and today you can bring that a little bit more together and have really the execution driven out of the real life of all the variants and all the complexity that there is in your processes.
Right.
Again, a very data-driven approach, but these actionable insights, and using those, I think that's one of the key innovation levers now going forward, and that also what brings BPM from a reactive mode to a very active mode.
Right.
And for me, that's really beautiful because being proactive today for companies, for fast-changing business models, is much more important than standard adherence and getting basically the last 20% of efficiency out of your processes. It's more like using the flexibility and getting more flexibility via insights-driven approaches in real time, and then taking the right actions based on all the complexity that there is, and not trying to manage this complexity first and simplifying it so much that you are able to manage it like in the past. I think that's an interesting thing to happen, and that's a lot of that's an innovative approach, and this will drive a lot of traction also on the BPM side.
Yes, that's great. And I guess for someone that's listening to this right now, that they're getting excited by, I guess, this approach that you're talking about, What are, and again, I know that there are organizations that will jump at technology maybe prematurely, and they don't have the fundamentals in place. Would you say that there are fundamentals when it comes to BPM, things that organizations should have in place as a ground level, a baseline before they start exploring these more advanced technologies?
Yeah. The key thing is, and it has been true since intelligent automation started, it's never about the technology. Yeah. So the technology is, it's all about how you employ this technology and how you basically use it. So it's all about the usage. Yeah. And companies tend to put everything on the technology card. Yeah. Basically go high stakes, high investment, and many transformational programs are based on, okay, I have to select the right technology first, which is not true, because at the end of the day, the smart application of technology is everything, and technology is something that is quite abundant on the market. Yeah. And it's not about the capabilities of the tools that you have, but it's about the capabilities of your people using these tools. And that again brings me to the point where I think enablement. Enablement of organization, of how to use this technology in the context of the technology you already have at your fingertips. Yeah? So not always buying the latest new stuff, but trying to, work with the stuff you already have deployed, together with your IT department, and clearly deciding which capabilities you put in which tools, but also how you drive the capabilities then with your people to leverage the capabilities of the software you have. I think that's a key fact. Yeah, and it has never been more important than today, because there's a lot of investment in technology and software, and this will increase. It has never been more important to really watch this. Yeah, what is the value add you're getting out of your technology investments? Yeah, which will depend a lot on how well you are using this, which depends on which capabilities you have built in your people, in your teams, in-house.
Yes, right. That's good. There are too many organizations out there that do have many different, technology that deliver the same value or are there for the same purpose, but it's just fragmented or disjointed across the organization, different teams using different technologies, and none of them have been implemented well or are being used well. Yes. And so I agree.
But all have been on the C-level slides already. So the success stories today on the C-level slides before you even have the first glimpse of going live with certain software products. Yeah, and I think that's a trend. And I mean, for me as a consultant, it's funny to say that, because of course the C-level sponsorship is essential for these initiatives to fly. Yeah. Yes. But on the other hand, I mean, I see this widening gap between the stories that are told and the reality, and how difficult it then is for operational teams to really chase, the dream. Instead of going step by step and having a chance to also, driving the evolution internally, because, there's always there is this word leapfrogging, which I hate to the core, because I never saw organizations leapfrog. Yeah, right. Never. You have to go step by step, because capability is not basically, you can try to buy it with buying talents, but also, buying talents and recruiting people, that's also a lengthy process. That's not happening from yesterday to today. Then they have to get acquainted with the organization, etc. Yep. You can always basically have the support of consultants like us to kickstart, and to get things moving, to enable your people, but also that takes a certain time. Yeah. So there is a limit to leapfrogging. Yes. Because the most important thing, again, is if you have a good set of tools, you have to have the people who are knowledgeable about these tools and who know how to drive them to adoption, because that's what you want at the end of the day. It's the high level, socialized, level of adoption in your company. Yeah. Then again, we are talking about the users that have to be acquainted with what this tool can do for them. And that have to feel great about using this tool, and that have to be great about being part of a process of putting this tool to a good usage for your company.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's, that's much more than having bought a software. Yeah. It's a much longer journey.
Yes, yeah. And how do you go about getting these process participants or the process performers on board? How do you include them in this journey? So I guess I guess what you're trying to do is limit as much resistance as possible.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean you have to, I think, acknowledge where the resistance comes from first. Yeah. So I think the acknowledgement is very important because you can't manage it, I think, if you're not respecting a little bit
Right.
the resistance, because there's always good reasons for it.
Mm.
For me, the key thing is enthusiasm, always. Yeah. So I mean, technology is great. Yeah. New technology capabilities can do a lot of great things, and people love progress. So people are all about progress. People love to evolve. People love to try out new things, and you have them. You have to bring that enthusiasm to them, and you have to make them burn for using this new capability and putting it to work. And then you
Right.
go first with the coalition of the willing, mostly the people that afterwards will also, deploy maybe the software or a BPM at a broader scale, who will make basically their career on that, or a good part of their career. And then, you try to engage broader stakeholder groups like the users at the end of the day. For me, it's very important to include them not only on the receiving side of things, but also in a very active way. Yeah, so they have to be an integral part of how things are being set up and how things work, and they have to be able to influence that process. Yeah.
Right.
So you make them participate via, hackathons. You make them participate via show and tell. You involve them very much in the design process, and in the optimization process afterwards, which follows. And I think that's important. I mean, to bring this enthusiasm also to them, and to also listen when there is resistance. What's the reason? Yeah. And then, try to integrate that in either in your approach, yeah, or in your story, because at the end of the day, I think the picture that people don't want to change and change resistance, yeah, I think is even the wrong word, because there is no resistance to change. There is resistance to change that I didn't understand, or that basically is doing something which I do not like.
Right.
Yeah. But there is no general resistance to change. You have to understand what the reason is, and you have to give basically then the different perspective. If you don't have it, yeah, then I mean you have to think hard, because then maybe
Yes.
your story lacks something, yeah,
Right.
or your approach lacks something, and there you have to be diligent with yourself. But generally, if you integrate these reasons for resistance, then afterwards in your approach or in your story, it gets better and it evolves, and it basically also gives this fit for the company you're working with, because no company is like the other company. Yeah,
Right.
the culture is different, how the departments are set up is different, the stakeholders are different. You have to make it, it's not one size fits all. It's basically you have to make it fit for the environment you're working in and for the people
Yes.
you're working with.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. And when you're, I guess, pitching to the top level management, senior leadership, the C-level executive team, obviously they, I mean, you were talking before about, there are oftentimes there's been a picture painted for them that maybe is different to what the actual outcome or reality will be. But when I guess when pitching BPM to that top level management, they're going to want to understand, well, how has it been adopted or implemented before? But more importantly, what was the output of that initiative? What value was delivered because they implemented BPM? Do you have stories or examples that you could share with us where, and whoever it was, whether it's in more recent time or in previous employment, that the organization that you were working with adopted BPM, whether that's a radical transformation or just a slight tweak of a process, and significant value was delivered to the organization?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there are many great stories and achievements which you always can tell, and depends a lot on the area you basically are talking to. I think, top down. In the past, you have always steered your company via KPIs. Yeah, today you have still the KPIs, which are driven by your normal BI, but you also have the ability and chance now to drive the process KPIs. Yeah, so not what the output, because KPIs in a financial sense tell you what the output of your processes is, but it doesn't really tell you, what the performance behind is. And I think that's the important addition to the general steering model of companies today. You can, with BPM deployed in your company with the use of technology, you can have insights into your processes, and you can finally do what you always wanted, is you can manage the operations in a very effective and data-driven way. Then, of course, depending on the departments below, it's not a siloed approach anymore. It's an approach that goes horizontal across end-to-end processes, across systems, across data models even. And here you can have a big impact by just making reality visible. That's basically the BPM. If today in a data-driven setup, that's the reality check to all the stories you heard about your corporate processes. And just reality check already gives you huge optimization potential. But managing this reality then in an insight-driven approach gives you the chance to go, big use cases first, and not the frustration-first approach you had before. And again, what you don't know, you can't manage or measure. Now you have the ability not only to steer and manage the operational and support function processes of your company, sometimes in real time, but you have the ability, to drive continuous improvement, which is what BPM should lead to, on a much broader scale, and really driving the impact where it matters, and basically not driving the impact where people see the highest need based on their experience.
Right.
I think that's the overall stories, and then of course, depending on which area you are, you have a myriad of use cases, and it goes from basically optimizing paint jobs, for car manufacturers, to optimizing closing processes, or optimizing the behavior of your purchasing department, or your basically or in the area of your material replenishment. And I think these stories, and here you have to be very concrete depending on the audience you're talking to, but these stories, you have to to show that it's real, and that it's basically not just some strategy slide with a high number or a catchy sentence, but you have to show that it's real. And I think the best thing you can always do is showcase. So
Yes.
show it on a demo environment. We have a lot of these, and I'm taking great care of collecting them afterwards, also after project on these assets. You have to be able to show it, and then you have to be able to make them experience. So after I had normally my first showcase, then maybe we do a hackathon. Let's find out. Let's find out based on your data, based on your people. And I think that's the best way you can go.
Great. That's awesome. And have you, over the last 2 years, obviously the world's kind of gone through a turbulent season, and they're still going through a turbulent season where I guess with COVID, it's disrupted a lot of areas of our life, and it's disrupted businesses and organizations. For some, it has been very challenging, and for other organizations, it's actually, I guess, played to their advantage or been in their favor. Would you say that since the beginning of 2020, how has this last year and a half, 18 months, what has it done for BPM? What has it done for organizations? Do you think there's been an increase in adoption, and if so, why?
Yes, because I think BPM is more important than ever, because the security and the reliability of supply chains has changed. Yeah, and the supply chains, I mean, for companies, this is this is everything. Yeah, if you can't develop the products and if you can't ship them to your customers, then you have a problem. And there has already been high complexity in that, and everybody has been optimizing, to a high level. Yeah, but that means that there is little buffers, little margin of security. You are dependent across thousands of steps, across not only your organization but your suppliers, etc. You are depending on all of them, and the dependence is very high, and the interrelation is increasing. So I think there has been a great push for BPM because you need a transparency. If you do not know, if you cannot forecast in a good way, if you cannot then also manage the processes, then you might get stuck. Yeah, and this has been, I think, a great driver for BPM, mostly on the side of process mining, to be honest, and because companies need the insights, and insight generation, in order to make supply chains in order to increase the transparency first, and then make it manageable in a second step, and avoid shortage of supply, avoid that your value generation works needlessly. It's easy for us as we are sitting, we're doing our work here in front of the computer, but at the moment you need to move goods. Then it gets interesting. Because then you depend on if a ship is blocking the Suez Canal or not, and how the containers are piling up, for example, in China and not getting back, and the transport prices are changing, etc. Or if there's a COVID outbreak in one of your suppliers' factories abroad. And these are, risk factors, which I think companies can manage, once they have the operational transparency of how things really happen and depend on each other, to really get in the driver's seat again, get actionable.
Yeah. That's great. That's really good. And when now looking towards, I guess, the future of BPM, and we've already touched on a number of these, technologies that organizations are exploring. RPA has been around for a while now. Process mining is a technology that's, has a lot of attention around it at the moment. But when you look into the future over the next 2, 3, 5 years, what does BPM look like, and how should organizations be, what does a BPM approach in the future look like?
I think it's highly data driven, so highly based on the reality of your processes. It's bottom up, so it's including the users and driving the optimization from the user side and not top down. It's embedded compliance, because once you have the transparency, you directly have control of compliance, and you can manage it on a transaction level. And I think it will be highly integrated, because today what RPA did is it added another technology layer on top of other technology layers.
Right.
And when you look at what companies have been doing for the last 2 years, is they try to integrate that, and software companies that try to integrate their technology stack. So they add additional capabilities, BPM vendors buying RPA, RPA vendors buying process mining, etc. They all try to get in the position that they can be the one and only platform between the user and the backend system.
Right.
And I think the integration of this, this is highly important for BPM, because this integration of these platforms makes it more likely that you can manage a lot via one platform. So have the classical transparency via mining, and which is basically data gathering and data transformation, and then visualization on the one hand side, but also the execution on the other side. Right. Which makes it very compelling. Very sometimes even real time, or near to real time, And also, it makes it much easier to really use the advantages of machine learning, because you have more structured data model once you mined, than before. And that gives you a great advantage then and lever for the execution piece afterwards. So I think the integration of technology, that is a core piece. Because you will have capability, from mapping, from collaboratively managing, process standards versus doing the reality check with fit gap versus how the process really perform, doing then the analysis or prediction, the modeling piece, really trying out variants and see how they would perform, all based on reality you have. And if you change pieces, what would happen? So the what if analysis, and then also going to automated execution monitoring, or even driving execution via the what I call always action engine. Everybody calls it differently, but via making predictions of what certain people in the process should do now in order to drive performance.
Right.
And not only performance in terms of throughput time, but whatever you define as performance. So if you want to improve your DPO, then that's a different approach than versus if you want to do something else. And I think the smart recommendation here, that will drive a lot of action afterwards. And I think this integration, of all these pieces, I think this will really be and define a little bit the future of BPM.
Right.
And of course, always very important. We tend to talk about technology and make technology the center of our thinking. I think it's one piece. There has been a lot of very, very well structured and good approaches, lean approach, for example, Six Sigma. That's still stuff you have to know and you have to do. Also putting a governance around BPM. So organizations, GPOs, etc. You still have to do that. And that has always been there. I think there's great expertise that companies have in this field because they have veterans like they have doing that for 35 years. I always highly recommend to use that knowledge.
Yes.
And basically merge it with everything that comes with technology transformation, to have at the end of the day a good, result for companies. Having the knowledge how lean works and how it worked in the past, and then also matching that with everything that comes with technology adoption.
Yes, right. So with having all of these different technologies integrated with one another, as you're saying, so we're going to be seeing, using data-driven insights, and then we're going to have using machine learning. It's going to be able to predict what the most optimum process should be, and then update the bot or the automation engine automatically. So there's no human intervention. We've got smart machines doing that continuous improvement for us, so to speak.
Not fully, because I think, and that's a big fuss in the market. So the so-called AI, which doesn't exist, but everybody talks about it. So I was referred to machine learning, and I mean, yes, there is machine learning, but I think there are several kinds of execution systems. So for example, an RPA bot is an execution system that is like a batch job in the past. It just runs on a different machine. So but it's still a batch job. So it's completely stupid. It's completely binary. So if then, if not. But there is, for example, more intelligent execution systems. For example, a chatbot. And you know why you should call it the RPA bot male and the chatbot female? Because a chatbot can multitask. An RPA bot cannot. An RPA bot can only execute. the chatbot can talk to 1,000 people in parallel. And it's also a kind of execution system. I think the trick here is it's a lot about natural language understanding, etc. Yeah, but it's somehow kind of a process execution. And I mean, in between, there's a myriad of many things. I think the core is, yes, you can use data to, for example, give the RPA bot signals you should work now or you should not work now. What people should always understand is you can never, ever get the machine learning in today's state to update either the RPA bot or the chatbot to do something they have never done before. Yeah, so this is the thing. For the RPA bot, the programmer needs to change the code. For the chatbot, a data scientist maybe needs to update the machine learning model, to give you different answers or update the data feed that is behind. But there's always human interaction in order to make these smart machines a little bit smarter in the end result. And people tend to forget that there's a lot of effort, a lot of expertise behind to do that. So it's not complete autonomous systems. It's basically, I think it's more about augmentation. So there is a digital workforce, there's a human workforce, and there has always been digital, even in the very old ages of ERP systems. That was the first steps when you get your first computers. There are digital systems, but there's also, I think it's more about the augmentation of these systems and how they interact with your workforce. But don't forget that also basically the machine side needs a lot of attention, and needs a lot of investment and development to really, learn stuff and go to the next step.
That's great. So we shouldn't be afraid that we're going to lose our jobs then. That's good to hear.
No, never. I think never, because where technology hits, normally, I think complexity increases. So it's different kind of work afterwards. You get much higher, you get a good return, because at the end of the day, you get higher outputs or throughputs. But still, I mean, consider the automotive industry, which is one of the most highly robotized and automated production processes in the world. Look at how their basically level of human workers developed over time. It's increasing. So I think I don't think there is any chance that the machines will take over, but still I think there will be a significant impact on the quantitative and qualitative requirements towards labor, and that's I think the challenge for us. A machine today is already much better in interpreting and reading data in no time with a high capacity. So that's a skill that's no longer required for us. Now the question is, what's then the requirement? How can we add to this process? There is a lot of things, because on the interpretation side, somebody has to consume the outputs, do the action. I think that's the challenge for us, to put our creativity and our work in the right spots, and see also how things are developing, because this is a never-ending evolution of what machines can do. I think it has worked great in the last 100 years for us. So why wouldn't it work great in the next 100 years? Just I think in ways that we can't really imagine today.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. And for those, I guess, for those people that are listening to this, we have a lot of people that I guess follow this series and listen to the different podcast episodes that they are obviously interested in the topic of BPM, and there's a fair few that are in organizations where there's a lower level of process maturity. And so they're reaching out, they're trying to look into resources, talk to people, find out what should my organization be doing, or what can I do to help drive BPM at my organization. So for these people, where would you encourage them to go to learn more about BPM? Obviously, there are many resources out there on the internet. Sometimes that can be quite overwhelming with who to listen to and what's right for our situation and our organization at this time. And obviously, connecting with different people. But what would you say is a good, I guess, next steps to learn more about BPM?
Besides listening to your podcast, I think the greatest thing you can do is, reach out in your company. try to find people that have the same ideas, or people that are actively engaged in BPM via their roles, and reach out, and try to build network and try to get into it, because I think it's a great thing to participate in changing how your job is done, and supporting the evolvement of the processes of the organization, and how value is delivered to clients or other stakeholders. So I think it's all about reaching out. It's for me, it's not about the theory or the practice you get going. For me, it's about getting engaged, reaching out, and building your networks in order to have a contribution that matters for your company.
That's amazing. That's fantastic. Well, Tobias, I just want to thank you so much for sitting down with me today and having this conversation. I've got a page full of notes here. I've certainly been learning a lot, and I know that our listeners will be learning a lot from our conversation as well. So I just want to thank you for sitting down with me and having this chat with me today.